All right, I think we're live. Crazy, crazy day today, guys. Sorry for this impromptu live. I'm sat here, got my laptop here. Wasn't planning to go live at all. iPad here, trying to figure this out. So not on my usual desk, but wanted to jump on to do a live, just to cover off what's going on. Really, just to keep an eye on the news because we know we're in a news cycle right now, and the news cycle is going to control pretty much everything that is going on. So we'll just let people jump into this stream. And whilst we wait for everybody to jump in the stream, I'll just take a quick look here at some of the major indices. You can see here we've got the DAX down 4%. Okay, we've got FTSE here in the UK where I am down almost 4%, CAC down 4%. Everything is to the downside as we'd expect. You've got the Dow Jones Industrial Index down 2%. S&P holding up fairly well compared to the other indices we saw in Europe, which makes sense, down 1%. NASDAQ neutral, interestingly, although it has taken a beating over the last few months, really, well into correction territory. Obviously, as you'd expect, commodities are soaring to the upside. You've got WTI oil up 4%, Brent up 6%. And right now, obviously, we know that crypto is taking a hit, right? So we're getting a big hit here on crypto. You've got Bitcoin recovering now after initially falling as low as, let's give you the low point here, 34,322. So congrats if you managed to buy that dip. We may still have some further downside. Remember, we're still in this pattern heading to the downside. But the reality is there's no point looking at technicals right now. Let's face it, we're in peak uncertainty right now. There's loads going on. And this is what we need to be wary of right now, is that so much going on macroeconomically, that is what's going to drive the market. And that is why I'm here giving you a live stream. So if you appreciate this type of content, more live streams where we can really get into the nitty-gritty, look moving the markets, look at the news. You guys can ask me questions here on the live stream and we can look into them together, because this is what's going to drive the market for at least the foreseeable future, guys. So there's no point plotting our head and shoulders pattern. There's no point looking at how much total value locked right now. Yes, for the long term, that's all fine, but short-term narratives and what's going to move the market is all going to be macroeconomic led. So really important that we stay on top of the news. Really important that we do that. Okay, so any questions, guys, just throw them as you come in, throw them in the chat. I've got the chat open here, so hopefully I can see your questions come in and we can get those answered for you. So yeah, hopefully you guys can hear me clearly as well. Let me know in the chat if you can't hear me properly. As you start to come in, do let me know. I'm going to put the live stream in the Discord link as well, so hopefully we can get more people in who don't have the notifications switched on. Let's see if we can do that. And yeah, it's just a crazy time. Waking up to hearing that is nothing we want to hear. First and foremost, we want to make sure that we're proponents of peace, and hopefully this escalation really does resolve itself. It's not going to resolve itself, but really come to an end diplomatically, quickly, without the loss of life, without suffering, because the world has seen a lot of suffering. We don't need this. We really don't need this right now, particularly coming out of the pandemic. A lot of people are struggling with their livelihoods. And the last thing we need is a war which could affect so many people. Even one person is too much, but let alone so many people. But from an investment point of view, guys, we've got to stay tuned. We've got to keep an eye on the market. So I'm going to be with you here on a daily basis, not going anywhere. So if you appreciate that, hit the like button. Make sure you subscribe to join us on this journey. We still need to be smart. We have a responsibility to our families, to our investment portfolios, to make sure we're doing the right thing. And, at times like this, peak fear, a lot of people can do irrational things, and it's really important that we stay super calm. Brandon Chan, welcome, welcome, welcome. Oh man, indeed, definitely. Oh man, yeah, definitely. Good to see you. Sao Chan Hartoon, welcome, welcome. Good to see you. And yeah, we just need to really keep an eye on the market. You can see Bitcoin obviously is falling to the downside here. One of our favorites here on this Phantom down 10%, but this is all irrelevant, guys. Like I can sit here and say it's down 10%. It doesn't mean anything to the wider perspective of what's going to happen with Phantom. It doesn't mean anything, because once this peak FUD unwinds itself, the inflation worries, the macroeconomic trends, the geopolitical issues with Russia and Ukraine, at some point we'll come to a resolution, and markets won't be as fearful as they are right now. Markets have no information right now. They don't know what's going on. Everybody's searching for information, and that is ultimately what leads to markets to fall to the downside is when they have very little information. So what I'm going to do now is let's flick over. I've got a few live news channels here open, which we are live streaming on YouTube. So let's kind of see what they're saying in terms of the news, and I'll just commentate over it. So we've got Sky News here from the UK. Let's see what they're doing.
From the Council of Europe, so there is no place for gangsters in the halls of civilized nations.
Yes, I think eloquently put, Mr. Speaker, and he's dead right. And I think that my honourable friend Henley made the point the other day, and I certainly, who's on the Council of Europe, and I certainly agree with that.
Sir Davis.
Mr. Speaker, so many Russians today see the attack on Ukraine as they would see an attack of their father on their mother, because there's such intimate family relationships between these two groups. And today, thousands of Russians are protesting in cities against their domestic law.
By the way, guys, this is you've got Boris Johnson making statements and getting asked questions as the leader of the UK here.
To help reduce the support, any support there is for this ridiculous war, and also provide sanction and safe haven for people, refugees, including troops who may want to re-engage, the troops outside of Ukraine, so they can re-engage, so we can win this war at home and abroad.
He makes a series of extremely important observations, and yes, I think it's vital that we get the message across to the whole of Russia about what is really going on. They're being lied to day after day, and I think that his point about supporting troops who need temporary exile, as it were, is a very good one.
Peter Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank.
Let's head over to
NBC's Yasmin Coram with us today. Yasmin, thank you.
NBC
Still to come,
News.
Ukraine under attack from all sides.
We are on the ground with Richard Engel in Ukraine with invasion from Russia.
Just for those unfamiliar with what's going on here, whilst we switch on back over to the charts, just so we kind of know what the story is. You've got Russia on the one hand saying there's, Putin's recognized two separatist areas, he calls them, within Ukraine, recognized internationally, and he's saying that there's a whole bunch of genocide and neo-Nazi stuff going on, and a lot of violence towards the people there, and he's saying he's going to support them. So by recognizing them as separate entities, he's put his troops there as measures to protect them, and now he's fighting against the Ukrainian army. That's what he says, and he says that he's not interested in invading Ukraine or occupying Ukraine. Now, Ukraine on the other side obviously saying this is complete invasion, complete occupation, somewhere, whatever the truth is, that's irrelevant in terms of investments. But obviously, whenever you have a war, the first thing you lose is the truth. So the reality is, whatever news stations we watch, whatever information we take in, we don't know the truth. We just need to decipher what's going on to make our decisions. And the key thing is to take all the data you can in and try to make the decisions as best you can based on your positions. Because the reality is, none of us are getting the real information. None of us are getting the complete cycle of information. And that always happens in war. That's normal. That is how propaganda machines work. That is how, anything works, right? From basics. If two people fight, you hear one person's story, hear the other person's story, and you've got to corroborate what's in the middle. And that's what the difficulty is for markets right now. They can't figure out what's going on. Therefore, they can't figure out the impact. What impact is it going to have on inflation? There's talks of all these sanctions on Europe or on Russia right now, but sanctions by definition have a blowback on the people imposing the sanctions. And this is a difficult thing, right? For example, it's easy for the US to say, everybody in NATO stop buying gas and oil from Russia, but then that would unequally affect countries like Germany, which are dependent on Nord Stream 1, right? It makes a difference to those economies. So in economies where which aren't booming, which no one's economy is right now, where inflation is rampant in every economy, where everybody's just had loads of stimulus, loads of printing in the Western world, it's going to be difficult for them to have their populations on side to support such sanctions and moves. And this is why the media narrative will be along those lines, right? Because they need to control that to be able to impose the sanctions that they want. It's a very tricky time for every single country involved, and ultimately we just want a smooth and steady resolution as quickly as possible. All right, guys, we've got 8 people in here. Please smash up the like button. Let's smash up the like button so more people can find this live stream. Let's also see what's here on CNBC. Russian forces invade Ukraine. Putin is redrawing an Iron Curtain across Europe, veteran Russian analyst says. And I think that's part of the worries, right? One of the longer term worries for NATO is if they start with these areas in Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk, and then they continue, where does it stop, right? Does it stop at Russia? Does it stop at Kiev? Does it stop? Do they keep going into Europe? Where does it stop? Because that's how things work, right? Will Russia just stop after Donetsk and Luhansk, or does it set a precedence that they can take and nibble away at land wherever they want? That's the issue and the struggle here. Let's switch back over here. Not here. Let's see what Boris is
But
saying.
the House will also have noticed the marvellous way the Prime Minister has spoken directly to the Russian people today. And I hope that he will bear in mind that at the moment, public opinion in Russia is rather different. That does underline the importance of accurate information. Prime Minister.
Yes, he is quite right, and I thank him. He's a distinguished former soldier, and he knows that truth is the first casualty. We have to make sure that we are telling people exactly what is going on, and to the best of my knowledge at the moment, the Ukrainians are resisting much more strongly than some people had thought that they would. Who knows how long they can keep going? Let's hope they can, and let's encourage them to do so. But, Mr. Speaker, let's get the message out as well. I think that is our job.
Chris Bryant. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is absolutely right. We equivocated shamelessly after Crimea. We were spineless. We must not be spineless now, because what will inevitably happen is either the Baltic states, one of the members of NATO, or perhaps Sweden or Finland will feel the wrath of Putin next. And that will mean British we need to try and set in train now a process whereby Putin himself ends up in a dock in a court. Norman Burkitt said, who was the alternate British judge at Nuremberg, said at Nuremberg, initiating a war of aggression is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. He must be brought to.
Let's see if we can go head on over to CNBC.
With offensive cyber strikes in Russia, and there's no indication that the president is planning to do that. But the president is reportedly planning on a range of tougher sanctions against the Russians. And there are some theorists who believe that the Russians could respond to that with cyber attacks against the United States. I talked to Dmitry Alperovich this morning. He's a cybersecurity expert who's been looking closely at this. And he says that, the Colonial Pipeline attack that we saw over the summer that caused gas lines up and down the East Coast, that was just a ransomware gang. He says Russian intelligence has capabilities inside the United States to do damage that are much, much greater than that. And that we could see, Colonial Pipeline times 100 just in response to U.S. sanctions here. So if the U.S. moves forward with sanctions this afternoon, then what's the Russian response to that? And are we already on an escalation ladder? And then the question becomes, what's the political pressure on leaders in the West and in Russia to either escalate or to de-escalate if the pain gets too intense?
Right. Great points, Eamon. It's a tricky one. We really appreciate your reporting. Thank you so much. Eamon Javers in Washington. The president is set to address the invasion of Ukraine. He's expected to announce more sanctions. He's already tweeted that this was done in coordination with G7 partners on their call this morning. We're still awaiting his appearance and those details. How far-reaching and punitive could the sanctions be? What would they mean for policy here and in Europe? Joining me now, Charles Kupchan is a senior fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations and a professor of international relations at Georgetown University. And Dan Clifton is head of policy research at Strategas Securities. Welcome to both of you. Charles, I'll begin with you. And you just heard.
See, Biden is just in a tricky position, man. He's already fighting the 40-year high inflation, and now you've got this issue on his doorstep. Apparently, early reports are saying that about 60% of Americans do not want America to get involved in this crisis. What's he to do? Even with these sanctions, he's going to be adversely affecting the US pockets, right? He said that in his address yesterday. He said it comes at a cost, these sanctions come at a cost, and it's going to increase the bills or the utility costs of the American people in a time when inflation is already at a 40-year high and we're just coming out of the pandemic. So he really is stuck between a rock and a hard place on this one.
This point, what we're looking at is number one, very significant severe economic sanctions. Number two, reinforcement of NATO's eastern flank, because if Putin is willing to invade Ukraine, might he test NATO? And three, I'm guessing we will see an effort to begin to get arms and other kinds of support to the Ukrainians to resist Russia's occupation. In many respects, that's the best way to defeat Putin. We can't stop his military, but we can foil his occupation.
Let me just follow up on that point for a moment. So if cyber attacks,
By the way, guys, on my drive up here to my business meetings here, I was just listening to the news on the drive up, just trying to keep up on what's going on. And you had the secretary of the UN, he said that, obviously Ukraine not being part of NATO, he said that they weren't going to place troops in Ukraine at this stage. But they are fortifying their lines across the NATO border. So it's very interesting. He said they have supported Ukraine with how to build their army over the years and how to military tactics and also financially as well. So just we're trying to gauge, how are they going to be able to assist?
SWIFT are off the table. We're still in the early stages. We could see things escalate over time. But you are talking about very significant far-reaching commercial sanctions against Russia. But in my mind, Putin knew this was coming. He made a decision to go forward, even though he knew what kinds of consequences it would bear. Where I think he's taking a leap into the dark is what comes after a successful invasion. Does he really think that he can install a puppet regime that will enjoy the support of the Ukrainian people? Does he really think he can hold down 44 million Ukrainians who no longer want anything to do with Russia? That's where I think he'll appeal.
all right, and Dan, what would you add to this and where would you focus it?
Yeah, I would start off by saying the economic sanctions are going to be pretty tough. It won't stop Putin, but this first, what I would call the first real round of economic sanctions, which are coming today, will be pretty biting on the Russian economy. I just don't think Putin really cares about that economic damage. Where you could start to see is in the further round, particularly the prevention of dollar clearing on certain industries. The U.S. very reluctant to use that and very different than SWIFT, but one that is going to be on the table if this continues to escalate. So I tend to believe that we're in a period of heightened volatility here. This will be determined by how long this effort goes on. If Russia can clear out the Ukraine government in 2 or 3 days, then it will become a much more silent behind the scenes fight. Cyber starts to become a bigger issue. And so we just got to adjust to it, because our ultimate thesis is that post-Cold War era is coming to an end. Borders are changing and investors are going to need to adapt to it. But I would argue here, Kelly, more defense spending, more cyber spending, and most importantly, a renewed focus on fossil fuels in both the United States and Europe, which is very different than the trend that we've been on over the last few years, given the ESG moment. But the world is about to disassociate itself with Putin, and they're going to need the energy security to be able to provide for that.
Absolutely.
Very important point there, guys. And I think this is the important thing for us as investors is we need to make our decisions based on when we feel the bottom is going to be, when we think there's peak FUD, right? But just like that guy said there, this could be over very quickly, or it could be long and drawn out. And so we need to be watching to find out what is that play? How does it happen, right? Because we need to say, okay, if it's a quick thing and Putin is literally just fighting for those two territories, which he says he wants to recognize as independent, and he goes and installs a puppet government in Ukraine, the physical military action, i.e. what's taking up all the news and the media right now, could be over very quickly, and it could go back to behind the scenes diplomacy, a bit more Cold War cyber attacks like the guy's saying, and that would have an effect on markets because the markets react very differently. If it's a long, drawn-out physical war, we hear more rhetoric around other countries getting involved, more military personnel, boots on ground. The market will react differently. So these are the things, these are the nuances we have to keep an eye on from an investment perspective. Really important.
He thought he could crack the West, divide US and Europe, divide countries within the European Union. So far, he's wrong. We've seen incredible solidarity. Sanctions are being applied in unison, shoulder to shoulder with European allies. And so I think that Putin really has overreached here. He's taken a big bite rather than a small bite. Over the long run, I think it's going to come back to haunt him. But as Dan was saying, we all better fasten our seatbelts. There will be big impacts on defense spending, big impacts on energy prices. And we need to prepare for something that's going to look like Cold War 2.0.
Dan, is there something that Putin can be offered still at this point as part of a negotiation, a way to save face, some kind of de-escalation or step down?
You know, I think that there was a hope that he could do that. But when you see an Operation Desert Shield-like formation along the border, he had made this decision a long time ago. As far back as 2014, we could find him making statements that Ukraine should no longer exist. And I believe that this is an ideological crusade to try and rebuild the Soviet empire. And so the only thing that's going to stop him is not a negotiation, but the fact that he has to realize that he overreached based on what we're seeing in terms of the unity of the West. And if that unity holds, it will be harder for him to actually continue to press forward, particularly if the U.S. is reinforcing along those borders of Ukraine, which I believe that we will start to see NATO starting to reinforce those positions. Putin is very flexible, but he is on a clear ideological mission to rebuild the Soviet empire.
Let's just come off for a second there. Let's see what NBC is saying.
Ukrainians, at least as of this moment. So what do I mean by that? When we talk about the banks and some of the issues that have come up there, it's been more about access to banking application.
This stuff is really interesting, guys. So now, like, modern warfare is all about cyber attack, ransomware, attacking government websites. This wasn't a thing, right, back in World War II, World War I. I'm not saying this is a world war just yet, hopefully not. But this is the ground, right? We're hearing one of the sanctions would be to remove Russia from SWIFT. SWIFT being the interbanking platform that they use. Think of it like plumbing for the financial network, and removing them off there would be huge for them, for their remittances, for forex trading, and the rest of it. But then that brings into account, what if people just use crypto, right? What if they use crypto as their immutable, completely decentralized? And that brings in narrative here on crypto. And some people are arguing, hang on a second, gold is doing really well, but crypto's fallen again, which just further cements the fact that Bitcoin is not considered a safe haven. And I've said that plenty times. Bitcoin is considered a risk-on asset for now, but long-term people will cotton on that this is by definition, not by sentiment, by definition, a safe haven, right? When governments go away, when things happen, when these types of wars happen, it is by definition a safe haven where people cannot mess with it. We saw that with the issue in Canada, right? We're seeing that maybe it's an option here for Ukraine to get funded by crypto. We're seeing things like that. We're seeing stories like that. Maybe Russia, if they're sanctioned by SWIFT, would return to crypto. So we're seeing so many undertones here around crypto. And literally, as we speak, Bitcoin crossing 36,000 here, nice candle through, trying to break this pivot point here on the hourly. I'm on the 1 minute chart here. Can it break above there? We got an important support line coming up, 36,118. If we can get above there, that'll be a really nice recovery here on the day so far, given what we've had as a situation here on the day.
I'm just throwing out hypotheticals of them having an issue, Morgan. The issue are, what are those kind of smaller either sub-companies that help support critical infrastructure? What types of vulnerabilities do they have with not the same amount of budget and same amount of robust cyber defenses? Could they be impacted, and could that have a trickle-down impact? That's something that we'll watch. We'll also watch whether or not there's the same type of incidents that we saw in Ukraine, the psychological type of incidents where you could have ransomware targeting schools, for instance, or targeting, again, not necessarily water supply, electrical grid, but things that still pose a major inconvenience to the daily lives of Americans. Could those be the types of things that we see? Right now, we're not seeing that type of traffic, at least at a notable standpoint, but we're obviously keeping an eye on it.
All right, NBC's Tom Winterforth there. Tom, we so appreciate you. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Vladimir Putin's speeches have analysts and experts scrambling to decode the Russian leader's intentions in Ukraine as Russian bombs.
Stay with us, by the way, guys. We're going to have Biden speaking soon, so I'm just going to pull up Biden, and whenever he's on, we'll switch over to Biden.
.com senior reporter Alexander Smith joins us now. Alexander, you've been looking into this, the analysis of the Putin's speeches and his rhetoric. What does it seem that this invasion is really about?
So yeah, I mean, I'm based in London, and over here in Europe, we woke up in the early hours of this morning to, frankly, another astonishing speech from the Russian president. Now, on Monday, we heard him go on this long, rambling discussion about Ukrainian history, Russian history. This time, he focused on the US and NATO, and his thrust was generally that he sees the US as having an unfair dominance.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good day. We're coming on the air with breaking news about the crisis unfolding in Ukraine. Just moments from now, President Biden will address the nation about Russia's attack on Ukraine, where there are reports of military and civilian casualties. Russia's assault already causing ripple effects throughout Europe and on our economy as well. The administration and U.S. allies once again condemning Vladimir Putin and vowing swift retaliation in the form of more severe sanctions. Today represents a critical new geopolitical reality. NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is standing by. Richard, any notion that this would be an event focused solely on the east of Ukraine has certainly been washed away. This is happening everywhere.
It is absolutely happening everywhere, and I think that was apparent right from the start. There had been speculation that...
Right, guys, I think we got Biden. Let's get to Biden.
Good afternoon. The Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine without provocation, without justification, without necessity. This is a premeditated attack. Vladimir Putin has been planning this for months, as we've been saying all along. He moved more than 175,000 troops, military equipment, and positions along the Ukrainian border. He moved blood supplies into position and built a field hospital, which tells you all you need to know about his intentions all along. He rejected every good faith effort the United States and our allies and partners made to address our mutual security concerns through dialogue to avoid needless conflict and avert human suffering. For weeks, we have been warning that this would happen. And now it's unfolding largely as we predicted. In the past week, Ukraine controlled by Russian-backed separatists. We saw a staged political theater in Moscow, outlandish and baseless claims that Ukraine was about to invade and launch a war against Russia, that Ukraine was prepared to use chemical weapons. Ukraine committed a genocide without any evidence. We saw a flagrant violation of international law in attempting to unilaterally create two new so-called republics on sovereign Ukrainian territory. And at the very moment that the United Nations Security Council was meeting to stand up for Ukraine's sovereignty, to stave off invasion, Putin declared his war. Within moments, missile strikes began to fall on historic cities across Ukraine. Then came the air raids, followed by tanks and troops rolling in. We've been transparent with the world. We've shared declassified evidence about Russia's plans and cyber attacks and false pretexts so that there could be no confusion or cover-up about what Putin was doing. Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time. We have purposely designed these sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia and to minimize the impact on the United States and our allies. I want to be clear, the United States is not doing this alone. For months, we've been building a coalition of partners representing well more than half the global economy. 27 members of the European Union, including France, Germany, Italy, as well as the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and many others, to amplify the joint impact of our response. I just spoke with the G7 leaders this morning, and we're in full and total agreement. We will limit Russia's ability to do business in dollars, euros, pounds, and yen. to be part of the global economy. Will limit their ability to do that. We're going to stunt the ability to finance and grow the Russian military. We're going to impose and we're going to impair their ability to compete in high-tech 21st century economy. We've already seen the impact of our actions on Russia's currency and the ruble, which early today hit its weakest level ever in history. The Russia stock market plunged today. The Russian government borrowing rate spiked by over 15%. In today's actions, we've now sanctioned Russian banks that together hold around $1 trillion in assets. We've cut off Russia's largest bank, a bank that holds more than 1/3 of Russia's banking assets by itself, cut it off from the U.S. financial system. And today, we're also blocking 4 more major banks. That means every asset they have in America will be frozen. This includes VTB, the second largest bank in Russia, which has $250 billion in assets. As promised, we're also adding the names to the list of Russian elites and their family members that we're sanctioning as well. As I said on Tuesday, these are people who personally gained from the Kremlin's policies, and they should share.
By the way, just had news here. Russian troops seized control of Chernobyl nuclear site after fierce battle.
In the days ahead. On Tuesday, we stopped the Russian government from raising money from U.S. or European investors. Now we're going to apply the same restrictions to Russia's largest state-owned enterprises, companies with assets that exceed $1.4 trillion. Some of the most powerful impacts of our actions will come over time as we squeeze Russia's access to finances and technology for strategic sectors of its economy and degrade its industrial capacity for years to come.
Bitcoin on the move as Biden is speaking.
We estimate that we'll cut off more than half of Russia's high-tech imports. It'll strike a blow to their ability to continue to modernize their military. It'll degrade their aerospace industry, including their space program. It'll hurt their ability to build ships, reducing their ability to compete economically. Strategic ambitions. And we're prepared to do more. In addition to the economic penalties we're imposing, we're also taking steps to defend our NATO allies, particularly in the East. Tomorrow, NATO will convene a summit. We'll be there to bring together the leaders of 30 allied nations and close partners to affirm our solidarity and to map out the next steps we will take to further strengthen all aspects of our NATO alliance. Although we provided over $650 million in defensive assistance to Ukraine just this last year, let me say it again. Our forces are not and will not be engaged in the conflict with Russia in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight in Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies and reassure those allies in the East. As I made crystal clear, the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full force of American power. And the good news is, NATO is more united and more determined than ever. There is no doubt that the United States and every NATO ally will meet our Article 5 commitments, which says that an attack on one is an attack on all. Over the past few weeks, I ordered thousands of additional forces to Germany and Poland as part of our commitment to NATO. On Tuesday, in response to Russia's aggressive action, including its troop presence in Belarus and the Black Sea, I've authorized the deployment of ground and air forces already stationed in Europe to NATO's eastern flank allies, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Romania. Our allies have also been stepping up, adding the other allies, the rest of NATO, adding their own forces and capabilities to ensure collective defense.
Can you see Biden struggling to read the auto cue? He's like squinting.
In its assault, NATO came together and authorized and activated
It's like President Biden, it's on the biggest font. We can't make it any bigger.
Readiness forces to deploy and when and where they are needed to protect our NATO allies on the eastern boundaries of Europe. And now I'm authorizing additional U.S. force capabilities to deploy to Germany as part of NATO's response, including some of the U.S.-based forces that the Department of Defense placed on standby weeks ago. I've also spoken with Defense Secretary Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, about preparations for additional moves should they become necessary to protect our NATO allies and support the greatest military alliance in the history of the world, NATO. As we respond, my administration is using the tools, every tool at its disposal, to protect American families and businesses from rising prices at the gas pump. You know, we're taking active steps to bring down the cost, and American oil and gas companies should not exploit this moment to hike their prices to raise profits. You know, in our sanctions package, we specifically designed to allow energy payments to continue. We are closely monitoring energy supplies for any disruption. We've been coordinating with major oil producing and consuming countries toward our common interest to secure global energy supplies. We are actively working with countries around
Wow, can Bitcoin head
the
through?
world to elevate collective release from the strategic petroleum reserves of major energy consuming countries. And the United States will release additional barrels of oil as conditions warrant. I know this is hard and that Americans are already hurting. I will do everything in my power to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. But this aggression cannot go unanswered. If it did, the consequences for America would be much worse. America stands up to bullies. We stand up for freedom. This is who we are. Let me also repeat the warning I made last week. If Russia pursues cyber attacks against our companies, our critical infrastructure, we are prepared to respond. For months, we've been working closely with the private sector to harden their cyber defenses, sharpen our ability to respond to Russian cyber attacks as well. I spoke last night to President Zelensky of Ukraine, and I assured him that the United States, together with our allies and partners in Europe, will support the Ukrainian people as they defend their country. We'll provide humanitarian relief to ease their suffering. In the early days of this conflict, Russian propaganda outlets will keep trying to hide the truth and claim success for its military operation against them. Eventually give way to grinding occupations, acts of mass civil disobedience, and strategic dead ends. The next few weeks and months will be hard on the people of Ukraine. Putin has unleashed a great pain on them, but the Ukrainian people have known 30 years of independence. They've repeatedly shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards. This is a dangerous moment for all of Europe, for the freedom around the world. Putin
Wonder if he's going to take questions.
Principles that uphold the global peace. But now, the entire world sees clearly what Putin and his Kremlin allies are really all about. This was never about a genuine security concerns on their part. It was always about naked aggression, about Putin's desire for empire by any means necessary, by bullying Russia's neighbors through coercion and corruption, by changing borders by force, and ultimately by choosing a war without a cause. Putin's actions betray his sinister vision for the future of our world, one where nations take what they want by force. But it is a vision that the United States and freedom-loving nations everywhere will oppose with every tool of our considerable power. The United States and our allies and partners will emerge from this stronger, more united, more determined, and more purposeful. And Putin's aggression against Ukraine will end up costing Russia dearly, economically and strategically. We will make sure of that. Putin will be a pariah on the international stage. Any nation that countenances Russia's naked aggression against Ukraine will be stained by association. The history of this era is written. Putin's choice to make a totally unjustifiable war on Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. Liberty, democracy, human dignity, these are the forces far more powerful than fear and oppression. They cannot be extinguished by tyrants like Putin and his armies. They cannot be erased by from people's hearts and hopes by any amount of violence and intimidation. They endure. The contest between democracy and autocracy, between sovereignty and subjugation. Make no mistake, freedom will prevail. God bless the people of a free and democratic Ukraine. May God protect our troops.
Let's see if he takes.
Creative Press, Zeke.
Oh, so he takes some questions.
Speak with President Putin at this point, and what interactions have you had with the Russian government?
I heard the first part. Do I have any plans to speak with Putin at this point, and what?
What communications have you had with the Kremlin as far as military offers Ukraine and making sure this does not spiral into a larger conflict?
Well, it's a large conflict already. The way we're going to ensure it's not going to aspire to a larger conflict is by providing all the forces needed in the Eastern European nations that are members of NATO. NATO is more united than it's ever been, and I have no plans to talk with Putin.
Ooh, I'm not talking to you.
Tarina.
Can you imagine? Yeah, these are the leaders of the free world. Like, I'm not talking to you.
That you announced. Is there a reason why the U.S. Isn't doing that? Is there a disagreement among allies regarding SWIFT and whether Russia should be allowed to be a part of it?
Good question.
The sanctions that we proposed on all their banks have of equal consequence, maybe more consequence than SWIFT, number one. Number two, it is always an option, but right now that's not the position that the rest of Europe wishes to take. Cecilia Vega, ABC.
Sir, sanctions clearly have not been enough to deter Vladimir Putin to this point. What is going to stop him? How and when does this end? And do you see him trying to go beyond Ukraine? And a second question I'll just give to you now. This statement that he gave last night, the threat that he gave, the West will face consequences greater than any you have faced in history. Is he threatening a nuclear strike?
I have no idea what he's threatening. I know what he has done, number one. And number two, no one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening. It has to show, this is going to take time. And we have to show resolve. The people of Russia know what he's put on them. That's what this is all about. This is going to take time. It's not going to occur. He's going to say, oh my God, these sanctions are coming. I'm going to stand down. He's going to test the resolve of the West to see if we stay together. And we will. We will, and it will pose significant costs on him.
Will he go beyond Ukraine, sir? Do you see him going?
Yes.
Two topics, just really quick. First, markets are down and gas prices are up. I know you always stress the difference between Wall Street and Main Street, but everybody seems to be in for some economic pain. How economically painful is it going to get for people in this country? And I do have one more question.
First of all, there's no doubt that when a major nuclear power attacks and invades another country, that the world is going to respond, and markets can respond all over the world. So there's no doubt about that, number one. Number two, the notion that this is going to last for a long time is highly unlikely as long as we continue to stay resolved in imposing the sanctions we're going to impose on Russia, period. What's your next question? I'm sorry.
The next question is, did you underestimate Putin? And would you still describe him the way that you did in the summer as a worthy adversary?
At the time, he was, I made it clear as an adversary, and I said he was worthy. I didn't underestimate him. And I've read most of everything he's written. Did you read I shouldn't, I'm not a wise guy. You heard the speech he made, almost an hour's worth of speeches, why he was going into Ukraine. He has much larger ambitions in Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about. And I think that his ambitions are completely contrary to the place where the rest of the world has arrived.
You're confident that these devastating sanctions are going to be as devastating as Russian missiles and bullets and tanks?
Interesting.
Yes, Russian bullets, missiles, and tanks in Ukraine. Yes, I am.
Thank you, President Biden. If sanctions
cannot stop President Putin. What penalty can?
I didn't say sanctions couldn't stop him.
You've been talking about the threat of these sanctions for several weeks now.
Yes, but the threat of the sanctions and imposing the sanctions and seeing the effect of the sanctions are two different things. They're two different things. And he's going to begin to see the effect of the sanctions.
And what will that do? How will that change his mindset here, given he's
Because it
attacking
will so
Ukraine
weaken
as we
his
speak?
country that he'll have to make a very, very difficult choices of whether to continue to move toward being a second-rate power or, in fact, respond.
But this is where you play chicken, right? Because it's going to weaken the NATO countries as well.
Like this, you recently said that the idea of personally sanctioning President Putin was on the table. Is that a step that you're prepared to take? And if not,
It's not a bluff, it's on the table.
sanctioning President Putin?
Yes.
Why not sanction him today, sir? Why not sanction him today, sir?
Mr. President, if I can, you detailed some severe and swift new sanctions today and said the impact it will have over time. But given the full-scale invasion, given that you're not pursuing disconnecting Russia from what's called SWIFT, the international banking system, or other sanctions at your disposal, respectfully, sir, what more are you waiting for?
Specifically, with the sanctions we've imposed exceed SWIFT. The sanctions we imposed exceed anything that's ever been done. The sanctions we imposed have generated 2/3 of the world joining us. They are profound sanctions. Let's have a conversation in another month or so to see if they're working. Yes.
Can I ask you about Zelensky? Sir, you spoke to Vladimir Zelensky yesterday, sir.
What's the risk that we are watching the beginning of another Cold War, and is there now a complete rupture in U.S. and Russian relations?
There is a complete rupture right now in U.S.-Russian relations if they continue on this path that they're on. And in terms of a Cold War, that depends. You have the vast majority of the rest of the world in total opposition to what he's doing, from Asia to South America to Europe to around the world. And so it's going to be a cold day for Russia. The idea, you don't see a whole lot of people coming to his defense.
And are you, if I could follow up, sir, are you urging China to help isolate Russia? Are you urging China to help isolate Russia?
I'm not prepared to comment on that at the moment.
Side charity.
Thank you, Mr. President. How concerned are you that Putin wants to go beyond Ukraine into other countries, and the U.S. will have to get involved if he moves into NATO countries?
Well, if he did move into NATO countries, he will be involved. We will be involved. The only thing that I'm convinced of is if we don't stop now, he'll be emboldened. If we don't move against him now with these significant sanctions, he will be emboldened. Look, you know, well, anyway.
Can you talk anything more about your conversation? Mr. President,
Why not sanction Putin?
How's he splitting?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sir, India, which is a major defense partner of the United States, is India fully with you on the issue of Ukraine and Russia?
Does the Defense Department of the United States?
So India is one of your major defense partners. Is India fully in sync with the United States on Russia?
We're in consultation with India today. We haven't resolved that completely.
One more question.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you.
So there we have it. Very interesting. Let's see how the markets responded to that. So we've got, while he was talking, we saw Bitcoin have a little run up, almost tried to run up to 37. I was like, nah, forget it. It's come back down, cooled off a little bit, sitting at 36,300. Let's see how the SPY did on Joe Biden speech. Again, had a bit of run up, sent back down, back to where we started pretty much on everything. So Biden didn't really tank the market. He didn't really rise the market. But it's as expected, right? He just got ahead and announced a few sanctions, as we'd expect. But it's interesting, like sanctions, is that going to be enough to deter Putin, right? Sanctions historically have been used as deterrents, but we're beyond the point of a deterrent because he's already started action. So a bit weird at what they're doing. But yeah, you can tell Biden's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. I think at some points there when he was speaking, you can see he had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. And you've got to think about it. If all these years, during your term, that Russia, a long-term superpower, decides to make such a play on the international map, it's quite damning on your leadership, right? So Biden must take this very personally. You can tell he is taking it personally. But is that always the best course of action? Should you be taking these kind of conflicts personally, or should you be very strategic and statesmanship-like, right? So interesting that he's taking it a bit emotionally. Will it mean he's not in the right mind space to make the right decisions? Time will tell that, right? But definitely, we know Putin is somebody who's very averse in politics, in war, in the art of war, in all these kind of things. So definitely he'll be playing his chess moves, and no doubt NATO will be playing theirs too. But Putin has the advantage, right? Whatever he's been planning it for a while, so he's got the first mover advantage. And the markets are doing all right, to be completely honest. I mean, given all the tensions we've had anyway, given that we knew we were going to have this volatility period up to March the 16th. And that brings me on to my final point before we kind of jump off this live stream, which is March 16th, we were expecting crazy interest rate hikes, right? That's what we were expecting in the lead up before all this started. Now that we've got all of this tension around, maybe this can be the catalyst we needed to pretty much put the nail in the coffin to say, hang on, we're only going to get a 0.25% interest rate hike. It gives the Fed permission to be more dovish without the pushback from the market. Say, hey, you're letting inflation out of control, because they can lean on this crisis to say, this is why we're being dovish. We know it's going to be affecting people. We can't go ahead and increase interest rates, right? Demand is going to fall naturally through uncertainty in a crisis. We do see aggregate demand start to fall. So definitely something for us to monitor over time. So just before we wrap up, I know you guys love a bit of cheeky Phantom. Let's have a look at Phantom. And again, like guys, there's no point looking at the technicals. Yes, as Bitcoin ran up, Phantom ran up to 147. It gives you a clue that these are the levels, right? When Bitcoin tried to run up to 37, Phantom wanted to go and hug 147, the same levels. So we know that as soon as the markets pick up and Bitcoin picks up, Phantom is going to move. Our favorite coins are going to get moving, but we need the market to sort itself out. And right now, we're in volatility mode. So get your head in the right place. No panic. Absorb information. Use different media sources. Forget about the politics. We're not here for politics. I'm not here for politics. I'm here for taking care of me, my family, my loved ones. And no doubt you guys should be doing the same. Take care of the people not in a position where we can control political issues. So the next best thing is to start off by taking care of our own homes. Yeah, inflation will get worse, but I don't think the recipe is for the Fed to come out. If the Fed came out with a 1% interest rate hike now, can you imagine in the backlight with this in the background? Even though inflation is going to go crazy because of commodity prices, we can see now oil is going through the roof. It's going to be crazy. And given the sanctions that Biden's just announced as well, it's going to affect the US population. It's going to affect the European population. It's why the European markets are all down right now. Look at this. These are the European markets today. Massive hit because it's going to affect the pockets too, but it's going to affect Russia too. So it's going to be a game of chicken in terms of the sanctions and the economic woes. But, I think the problem is I don't think personally that sanctions are going to be enough. I think Biden thinks it's going to be enough, but you've got to remember that any kind of power who's calculated the decision to do this, they would have calculated the ramifications of a sanction as well. They would have had the buffers to make sure they're taken care of. And we know that Russia is not as dependent on debt as Western countries are. That's just a point blank fact. So maybe they have the reserves to take care. They also made sure they removed out of, if you remember, I think it was about, how long ago? It was a little while ago that they moved away from USD in their treasury to more yuan and other currencies as well, which was very interesting. So clearly maybe this was planned over many, many years. We know that the initial issue around Crimea, when first sanctions were threatened, including the SWIFT at the time was threatened. So that's why Russia have even built their own financial mechanisms around SWIFT as well, which we don't know how good that is, if it even works. But clearly they've thought about these things to prevent themselves. Clearly they would have thought about cybersecurity. They would have thought about sanctions. And so maybe Biden's going to need a few more tricks up his sleeve. NATO will need a few more tricks up their sleeve too. So there you go, guys. There was our first live stream. If you guys enjoyed this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Don't forget to check out NordVPN if you're not set up on a VPN. If you're browsing some news to learn about the war and you want to do so in a private manner, get yourself set up on VPN. Links in description. Coupon code ALLMAN. don't stress about the markets right now. If you don't look at your portfolio, not interested. If you're buying the dip, go ahead and buy the dip. But I wouldn't even go all in on buying the dip right now because there's more downside to come, in my opinion, because I think this can continue to escalate. If we see things start to improve, if things are quick and painless, as painless as can be in the situation, then maybe you can start to scale your positions in and buy the dip, but just go easy now. If you're buying, nibble. Nibble is probably the best bet right now. Not financial advice. Do whatever you want to do at the end of the day. Thanks for watching this live stream. I will see you in the next one.